Psychology says people who often cut everyone off easily are often misunderstood as being cold, damaged, or antisocial. But in reality, there's a specific kind of silence that comes after years of noise. Not the silence of an empty room, but the silence of a phone you stopped checking, of group chats you left unread, of birthdays that pass without a single text, and you realize you don't miss hearing from anyone at all. This isn't a trauma response. It is a sign that you have developed a specific set of high mindset traits that the average person simply hasn't unlocked yet. You didn't stop caring. You started caring for yourself. You realized that what people call coldness is actually clarity. If you've reached the point where you'd rather have an empty funeral than one filled with people crying crocodile tears, then you need to understand what is actually happening in your nervous system. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And if you love deep psychology like this, check out my newsletter community after watching, linked in the description. Now, let's look at the first trait, which usually starts with a painful mathematical realization. You have developed a high threshold for reciprocity, or what behavioral psychologists link to social exchange theory. But let's call it what it really feels like. You finally realized that crumbs aren't a meal just because you're hungry for connection. For a long time, you were probably the one over-functioning. You were the person driving 2 hours to fix a flat tire for someone who wouldn't even walk down the street for you. You were the one initiating every text, carrying every conversation, and celebrating others while your own milestones were treated like invisible events. You spent years pouring your cup into cups that weren't empty, they just had a hole in the bottom. The simple math solution you arrived at is this. When things don't add up, you subtract yourself. This isn't about being transactional. It's about energy economics. You realize that people don't cut everyone off because they don't care. They do it because they care too much in systems that don't care back. You reached a breaking point where you understood that the most dangerous thing isn't isolation. It's convincing yourself that low-effort behavior is acceptable love. If you cut people off easily, it's because your self-worth has finally evicted your fear of being alone. You stopped accepting being someone's last choice and telling yourself, at least I made the list. Now, understanding the math is one thing, but that doesn't explain the immense sense of relief you feel when you finally walk away. That relief comes from the second trait, the rejection of the performance contract. Many of us grew up in environments where love was conditional. You learned early on to be useful, to be safe. You became the therapist, the fixer, the strong one. You built an entire personality around being indispensable because you thought being needed was the same thing as being loved. You became the milk cow for everyone else's emotional hunger, letting them drain you dry while they offered nothing in return. But here is the high mindset shift. You got tired. You got tired of performing a version of yourself that was digestible for others. You realized that you were already alone long before you physically left. You were alone in the room with them because they didn't know you. They knew the service you provided. They knew you were useful. When you cut people off easily, it's usually because you've decided to stop the show. You've realized that people keep you around in case they need you down the line, not for loyalty, but for utility. And the minute you stopped being useful, the minute you asked for anything that resembled help, they mocked you or they walked away. Cutting them off is simply you tearing up that contract. It's you saying, I am no longer auditioning for a role in my own life. You stopped explaining yourself to people who were never trying to understand you, but were just waiting for the opportunity to use you again. You realized that being selfish is just the ending of the cycle of self-erasure. However, there is a biological component to this that goes beyond just deciding to leave. If you find peace in silence, you possess a highly tuned biological trait known as neuroception. Dr. Stephen Porges, who developed the polyvagal theory, explains neuroception as the body's subconscious system for detecting safety or threat. For most people, their threat detection is broken. They stay in toxic environments because the chaos feels familiar. They mistake the adrenaline of the hot and cold game for passion. But you? Your nervous system has upgraded. You've started to realize that your body rejects people before your mind does. You might feel drained, anxious, or physically heavy around certain friends or family members. That is your biology screaming at you. You learned a profound truth. Isolation isn't the opposite of connection. It is the absence of rejection. It is the absence of having to decode mixed signals. When you cut people off, you aren't being mean. You are regulating your nervous system. You are choosing a regulated state of peace over a dysregulated state of chaos. You've discovered that the silence in your house feels like peace, not loneliness. You're baking cookies. You're reading books. You're sleeping like a baby. Why? Because your body knows it's safe now. You aren't isolating. You are incubating. You realize that being alone is better than being lonely with the wrong people. This leads us to a trait that often gets confused with cynicism. People might tell you, you're too judgmental, or you don't give people a chance. But the truth is, you have developed elite pattern recognition. It's not cynicism, it's data. You've seen this movie too many times to sit through it again hoping for a different ending. You know the pattern of the slow fade. You know the texture of a one-sided friendship. You recognize the "I've been so busy" text for what it is, a soft rejection. You spot the red flags in the first 15 minutes of a conversation. In the past, you gave the benefit of the doubt until you were emotionally bankrupt. Now, you realize that action is the currency that buys credibility. And when the words and actions don't align, you don't stick around to ask why. You just disconnect. This is a high intelligence trait. It means you trust your perception of reality more than you trust their potential. You understand that you can't afford to keep giving your energy to people who don't reciprocate it or appreciate what you bring to the table. You don't need closure conversations. The disrespect was the closure. The silence is the answer. Abandonment hurts less when you are the one who initiates it. At least this way, you saw it coming. Now, recognizing patterns helps you avoid the bad. But what are you actually looking for? This brings us to the fifth trait. You value depth over width. There is a powerful sentiment shared by those with this mindset. I'd rather an empty funeral than one filled with people crying crocodile tears. We live in a culture that treats people like collectibles. The more friends you have, the more successful you appear. But psychology points to Dunbar's number, which suggests our brains can only maintain about 5 close, stable relationships, and maybe 150 acquaintances. If you cut people off easily, it's because you are correcting the imbalance. You realized you had 50 acquaintances and 0 friends. You realized that having neighbors, co-workers, and friends from high school who drain you is an expensive way to live. You are practicing relational minimalism. You aren't antisocial. You are selectively social. You crave the deepness that is already in your soul. You want conversations that matter, loyalty that is tested, and presence that is real. If the table isn't serving peace, encouragement, and purpose, you'd rather eat alone. You have learned that solitude is not social failure. It is a choice to face yourself and your true nature without distraction. This next trait is the most misunderstood of all. People think you are holding a grudge. They think you are bitter. But the high mindset trait here isn't hate, it's indifference. Hate requires energy. Hate requires you to still be attached to the outcome. But indifference? Indifference is zen. When you cut someone off with this mindset, there is no drama. There is no big announcement on social media. You don't block them to get a reaction. You block them to protect your focus. It's a soft delete of the soul. You've learned that someone thinking you hate them is irrelevant. The reality is worse than that you just don't think about them. You've reached a state of acceptance. You accept them for who they are, and you accept that they cannot be who you need. This indifference is a shield. It's about protecting the small part of yourself that is still capable of trust by refusing to spend it where it won't be honored. You aren't punishing them. You are just done engaging in the hot and cold game. You've taken your player off the board. You realize that hating them destroys you, but ignoring them frees you. But perhaps the most profound trait is one that goes back to your childhood. You have stopped trying to earn your place. For a long time, you might have believed that if you just tried harder, cared more, or gave enough, they would finally show up for you. You thought your love could fix their inability to love. But the high mindset shift happens when you realize you cannot love people into respecting you. You gave up on relationships where you have to shrink, perform, or beg to be seen. You stopped normalizing relationships where you did all the emotional labor. You realized that you were spending emotional currency you didn't have on people who weren't even checking the balance. So when you cut them off, it wasn't an act of aggression. It was an act of self-preservation. It was you finally listening to that quiet voice that said, "This costs too much." You decided that you would rather be alone than be in a room full of people and feel invisible. You realized that you were already surviving on your own, emotionally speaking. So making it physical just made the reality match the feeling. And this often extends to the hardest cut of all family. There is a taboo in society about cutting off family. But if you have this mindset, you likely realize that toxic is toxic, regardless of shared DNA. Maybe you realized that when your parents died, it revealed how little of a bond you actually had with your siblings. Maybe you realized that you were the scapegoat, blamed for everything, and your goodwill was seen as conceit. You cut them off because you realized that just because they are blood doesn't mean they have the right to bleed you dry. You decided that you wouldn't let family be an excuse for invalidating your every word and feeling. You chose to be the one who breaks the cycle, even if it meant walking away alone. So, let's reframe this entire narrative. Society tells you that cutting people off is a sign of being damaged or avoidant. They tell you, you've become so cold. Your answer should be, I haven't become cold. I just learned that you don't deserve my warmth. What you are actually doing is architecture. You are designing a life of peace. You are curating your ecosystem. Think about a garden. To get the most beautiful roses, you have to prune the dead leaves. You have to pull the weeds. If you don't, the weeds steal the nutrients from the flowers. For years, you let the weeds grow because you felt guilty about pulling them. You let people fleece you dry emotionally. But now you understand that you are not giving up on people. You are giving up on the version of yourself that tolerated disrespect. You are making room. And yes, it might be quiet right now. It might be your first Christmas alone. It might feel strange to have no weekend plans. But that space is where the new, right people will eventually enter. And until they do, you are in the best company you could possibly ask for, your own. You aren't crazy for wanting peace. And you aren't wrong for walking away to find it. You are simply waking up. If this video validated the silence you've been feeling, leave a calm emoji face in the comments to show that you are done accepting crumbs. And listen, if you want to understand the deeper psychology about yourself and how to rebuild your inner circle correctly, you need to join my newsletter, Psychology About You, in the description and pinned comments. I share only researched insights there that YouTube won't let me say.